Before you take N-acetylcysteine, you need to watch this video. Hey guys, Philip here with MD Fit, fourth year medical student, and today we're breaking down a randomized control trial that is pretty impactful in the world of N-acetylcysteine. I've seen a lot of videos touting N-acetylcysteine's benefits, but this study kind of changes everything in regards to how to properly supplement for longevity, as well as if you are in a kind of compromised state, if you are ill, something of that nature, how to properly use N-acetylcysteine. So we're going over a randomized control trial that looked at the supplementation of both N-acetylcysteine and glycine to improve a host of different markers, from physical function to molecular markers as well, that looked at mitochondrial function, oxidative stress, inflammation, insulin resistance, and a host of other molecular markers as well. This is a 16-week study, and it had some pretty impactful results. Coincidentally, it was done at my home institution of Baylor College of Medicine, so it extra hits home for me, but that is not relevant for you guys. Today, I want to break down what the results of this study were and how you can apply these results to your own life if you are somebody who might be a good candidate for N-acetylcysteine usage. I would not say that everybody is a great candidate for N-acetylcysteine usage, and you will get to see exactly kind of who is and who isn't. So without further ado, let's get into the video. So before we get into the results of this study, I want to make a quick aside. I made a video on N-acetylcysteine usage and what N-acetylcysteine is, what it does, why people are supplementing it, what glutathione is, all of the benefits, all of the effects necessarily of N-acetylcysteine. So if you haven't seen that video, I highly recommend you watch that one first and then come to this one so that you can be well caught up and nothing will be going over your head. But to give you a little bit of background, glutathione is essentially the body's primary intracellular antioxidant. And as you get older, aging is associated with reduced endogenous glutathione production, which thus leads to increased oxidative stress, decreased mitochondrial fatty acid oxidation, increased inflammation, and increased insulin resistance, etc., etc. So prior work by the people who conducted this study by the same group demonstrated that older adults are deficient in glutathione due to impaired synthesis endogenously. Specifically, this is from a reduced availability of two precursor amino acids, glycine and cysteine. So this study looked at not only the supplementation of N-acetylcysteine, but also the concomitant use of glycine in N-acetylcysteine. So this is a very groundbreaking study in that sense that can kind of tell you a little bit more about how to use N-acetylcysteine instead of kind of going willy-nilly, and that there could actually be some potentially deleterious outcomes to using too much N-acetylcysteine without glycine usage as well. But before we get into that, let's get into the study. What were the methods? What did they do? What was the study design? So it was a randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trial. So a very high level of scientific impact and a high level of power for statistical significance so that you can actually draw conclusions from this study. This isn't a simple epidemiologic study. This isn't a survey study. This is an RCT. It had 12 young adults with a mean age of 26 years of age, and then it had 24 older adults with a mean age of 71. Those older adults were then split up into two groups, the glycine N-acetylcysteine group and then the placebo group that received just an alanine amino acid pill that they would take, and they did not know whether or not they were taking the glycine N-acetylcysteine or just the placebo. I'm going to refer to the glycine N-acetylcysteine as GlyNAC because that's just too much of a mouthful. So the GlyNAC group received 100 milligrams per kilogram per day of glycine, as well as N-acetylcysteine. They received 100 mg per kg per day. So for a 70 kilogram adult, which is about 150 pounds, they received 7 grams of each. So this is substantially higher than a casual supplemental dosing online. A lot of the times you'll just see, oh, take 2 to maybe 600 milligrams per day. But this is essentially what you would consider to be a mega dose, right? Or a much higher dose than you see just for basic kind of longevity purposes. But again, they wanted to see outcomes. They wanted to see results in this study. And if you are an otherwise healthy individual that is relatively younger, on the younger side, higher doses aren't necessarily meant for you, but this study used a higher dose. So they assessed many different data points. There were over 25 endpoints measured. So some of the endpoints that they measured were total glutathione stores, oxidized glutathione stores, a reduced glutathione to oxidized glutathione ratio. So essentially what that means is that you have the reduced form of glutathione is being used, or the reduced form of glutathione in the body has not yet neutralized any kind of reactive oxygen species, while the oxidized version has. So that kind of gives you an idea of how much reduced how much glutathione is kind of necessary. If you just have a crazy ratio of reduced to oxidized, then that means your body's antioxidant capacity is far kind of outpacing the amount of reactive oxygen species or the amount of oxidative stress in your body, which isn't necessarily a good thing, but we'll get to that later. They also measured something called TBARS, which is a measurement for lipid peroxidation, and then F2 isoprostanes. For mitochondrial function, fatty acid oxidation rates were measured, glucose oxidation, as well as gene expression of mitochondrial regulators were measured. For inflammation, a bunch of different cytokines were measured from TNF alpha, IL-6, IL-1 beta, and high sensitivity C-reactive protein. Now, we're not going to get into the weeds about what all of these does. These are more just general markers for inflammation. All of these are different signaling molecules, and they signal for different inflammatory responses within the body. Metabolically, they measured fasting glucose, insulin, and then insulin resistance. To look at vascular function, they looked at endothelial function. For physical function, they looked at grip strength, gait speed, and exercise tolerance. And then for aging hallmarks, for molecular markers of aging hallmarks, they looked at a variety of different genes and markers. I'll just put them right over here. Now, as a quick aside, the young adults actually were terminated in this study. They were given the glycine N-acetylcysteine mixture for, I believe, just 2 weeks and then measured pre and post, while the older adults completed the full spectrum of the 16-week cycle or the 16-week protocol. Now, this is because we saw, or the data showed, that younger adults already have high levels of glycine and N-acetylcysteine. They're not deficient in glutathione quite yet. So there was much less of a benefit, or they didn't really see much of a benefit derived from the young population within the study. So they were discontinued. But what are we looking at? We're really curious about older adults. What did this do? So for glutathione restoration at baseline, older adults had about a 40 to 50% lower glutathione level compared to young adults. After 16 weeks, total glutathione increased about twofold with a reduced to oxidized glutathione ratio that normalized towards youthful levels. So they essentially came back to what the young population had. Older people had the same oxidized or reduced to oxidized glutathione ratios that young people had. In the placebo group, as you can imagine, there was no significant change. And this confirms that the intervention successfully restored intracellular glutathione synthesis. This is super important, and this is huge. For markers of oxidative damage, TBARS and F2 isoproteins, these significantly decreased. TBARS decreased by about 30 to 35%. These reductions are correlated directly with glutathione restoration as well. And this means that less oxidative damage, right, to lipids, proteins, and DNA then leads to slower aging. So this is also great. In terms of mitochondrial function, older adults at baseline showed decreased fatty acid oxidation and an increased reliance on glucose metabolism. After GlyNAC supplementation, mitochondrial fatty acid oxidation increased 30 to 40%. This is huge. Abnormal fuel utilization patterns shifted towards essentially youthful profiles with expression for mitochondrial regulatory genes normalizing as well. So essentially, this repaired a lot of mitochondrial dysregulation that can occur with aging. And this is important for fat loss, metabolic flexibility, energy production, endurance performance, and again, just overall speed at which you age. In terms of inflammatory markers or inflammation, inflammatory cytokines decreased substantially. TNF alpha, IL-6, IL-1 beta, and high sensitivity C-reactive protein all were significantly reduced. I'll put the numbers right up here. In the placebo group, there were no improvements, with some markers actually worsening slightly. So insulin resistance, this is really, really big and really important for anybody that cares about their health, was measured through a test called HOMA-IR, Homeostatic Model Assessment for Insulin Resistance. And it essentially is just a calculation that looks at the relationship between your fasting blood sugar and the amount of insulin that you have in your system. So older adults at baseline had elevated insulin and HOMA-IR, right? So they required more insulin to shuttle a given amount of glucose into their cells. After GlyNAC supplementation, fasting insulin decreased and HOMA-IR scores improved 25 to 30%. This means that glucose metabolism efficiency improved, and this again ties to mitochondrial health and improved mitochondrial fatty acid oxidation, as well as a decreased reliance on insulin, which can be an oncogenic hormone, very pro kind of aging hormone. It's not bad in all senses, of course, but having higher insulin resistance is repeatedly tied to increased all-cause mortality, from cancer to heart disease to diabetes to obesity, whatever you want. For endothelial function, which are the cells that line the blood vessels of your arteries and your veins, for example, all measures significantly improved for vascular function, and there were also modest improvements in blood pressure. This suggests a improved nitric oxide bioavailability. Nitric oxide dilates the blood vessels and thus can lower your blood pressure. And as you get older, again, nitric oxide levels can decrease, can go down. So being able to restore nitric oxide back to more youthful levels in an older adult or an older individual can be extremely beneficial in the context of improving cardiovascular risk, exercise performance, cerebral perfusion, preventing things like Alzheimer's, potentially dementia, or even strokes. So again, this is something that is very beneficial for anybody who's looking to kind of get a longevity benefit, particularly in the context of N-acetylcysteine and glycine, which are essentially just two precursor amino acids that are tolerated very well. I mean, even at a very high dosage, like 7 grams, these are all tolerated very well. Looking at body composition, waist circumference decreased significantly, with central adiposity reducing despite no structured exercise intervention, likely driven by an increase in fatty acid oxidation by the mitochondria and a decrease in inflammation. Finally, looking at some of the kind of aging markers that were looked at in this study, one marker that is looked at for cellular senescence is known as P16INK4A. And this expression of this molecule, of this marker, was decreased, meaning that there are fewer senescent cells within the body. Senescent cells essentially are like zombie cells. They are not productive. They are essentially just waste products and are a large generative force for inflammation within the body. So having a lower amount of P16INK4A in the body is a great marker, meaning that you're aging at a slower rate, theoretically. Stem cell function was measured through PAX7 expression, which was the marker chosen, and this was found to have improved muscle satellite cell availability. Muscle satellite cells are essentially stem cells within the muscle. So in a very targeted way of looking at this, you can even just see that this could potentially help you recover faster from workouts, right? Muscle satellite cells are the stem cells within the muscle, and they can differentiate into a host of different kind of muscle-related tissues. So if you have a bunch of micro trauma from a workout, for example, increased satellite cell availability could potentially allow you to recover quicker. For proteostasis and mitophagy, markers of autophagy and mitochondrial quality also improved. We're not going to go too far and get too in the weeds with this, but again, we already demonstrated kind of how mitochondrial function has improved. For genomic stability, there were reduced markers of DNA damage and oxidative injury as well. The authors concluded that 7 major hallmarks of aging were favorably impacted within just a short 16-week trial. So this is huge, and I think anybody that's interested in longevity or anybody who's kind of involved in the longevity space should really look at this supplement as a potential therapy, particularly for older adults. And why am I saying this? I'm saying this because the safety profile is amazing for N-acetylcysteine and glycine. There were no serious adverse events seen within this study, even for a very large dose. It was very well tolerated. There were no liver, kidney, or hematologic toxicity reports throughout the entire duration of the study. The only thing that I can really find for people taking this supplement in terms of a potential side effect is GI distress. But I mean, that's going to be very variable. That's going to be based off of your dosing pattern, as well as a host of other things. But it seems like it's very well tolerated overall. So just to wrap up, I want to make some final points. So while this study is amazing and gives you some amazing results, there are a few limitations. It is a relatively small sample size with only 24 older adults, a shorter duration with 16 weeks, right? It would be great to have a longer duration to really see overall, over time, do these benefits persist, et cetera, et cetera. The older adults are relatively healthy, so we're not necessarily going to see the same amount of change, right? Maybe we would see an even larger change in health parameters if the older adults were sick. And the study doesn't necessarily give you or give us indications for how to move forward with supplemental dosing, right? For clinical outcomes for real life patients. Are they recommending that we take 7 grams of each glycine and N-acetylcysteine a day? That's not what I've been seeing a lot of other people recommend online, and I don't think that's what this study is getting at. I think it's just giving us some very interesting results that could potentially be very useful if used at a lower dosage for a long period of time. Now, one thing that's really important to remember is that you don't want to reduce your oxidative stress in the body too much. And so this is why potentially over supplementing could be dangerous. Now, this is a really important caveat that I want to get to, which is the reductive stress caveat. So this is why this study is so important, because the usage of both glycine and N-acetylcysteine actually prevents cells from being damaged by what's known as reductive stress. Now, a lot of people online have talked about N-acetylcysteine and its benefits, and I would tend to agree. It seems like a very beneficial compound. But if you take too much N-acetylcysteine, right? If you start megadosing this stuff or taking it for too long, or you take it at an age, like say you're 26 like me, I don't necessarily need to be taking this compound because my glutathione stores are probably very adequate. And if you are somebody who has adequate stores and supplements N-acetylcysteine alone, then you could be triggering this thing known as reductive stress. What is reductive stress? Essentially, it is the phenomena where you have excessive antioxidant suppression, which can be just as damaging as having too much oxidative damage to the body. When you don't have enough reactive oxygen species in the body, your body requires a certain amount for cellular signaling and cellular function. And so when you take too much N-acetylcysteine, you have too much glutathione in the body, for example, you could potentially be putting yourself in a state that could be damaging towards your tissues, as if you had too much inflammation or too many reactive oxygen species. So it's very important. Now, this is something that hasn't really been fleshed out in clinical data, right? We haven't seen excessive antioxidant suppression within human trials, but within C. elegans, which is a roundworm, it was shown that too much glutathione or too much N-acetylcysteine actually accelerated aging. But glycine and N-acetylcysteine lowered oxidative stress without dropping it below youthful levels, thus avoiding this reductive stress entirely. So this is something that's really important. It's something that's not being talked about, but I want to make sure that you are aware. So if you're somebody who is looking at taking N-acetylcysteine, first understand what it is, the potential risks, the potential benefits, right? If you're 26, my age, don't waste your money on this stuff. But if you're a little older, probably 40s, 50s, I would recommend looking at N-acetylcysteine at lower dosages. But also, I would take it with glycine to make sure that you're protected against this reductive stress caveat. Finally, one final point aside, I've seen a lot of different dosaging protocols online. I like conservative dosing, but I think it's also important to say that one size does not fit all. We are all different, but as a general rule of thumb, the older you get, the more you should be taking. So if you want to start at 200 in your 40s, then maybe by the time you're 70, take 600 a day. But that's going to be it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed. I think this study is extremely important and very impactful to the kind of scientific literature and the body of knowledge as it pertains to N-acetylcysteine. Please, if you found this video informative or enjoyable, like, comment, subscribe. It really helps out. And we'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.